Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Martin Lockstrom, Executive Director of International Institute of Operations Management. Welcome to today's tutorial, which is about the beer game and how to play our online single-player version. Let's dive in. Bullwhip effect, a term deeply embedded in the field of supply chain management, describes a phenomenon where order variances amplify as one transitions from the downstream to the upstream echelons of a supply chain. This term has an intricate history rooted in real-world observations, empirical studies, and the rigorous academic examination of supply chain behaviors. Its recognition and understanding have been instrumental in reshaping supply chain strategies and approaches over the years. The initial concept of demand amplification, though not yet termed a bullwhip effect, can be traced back to operations research and production management studies in the mid-20th century. Forrester in 1961 was among the first to detail systemic dynamics, highlighting how industry operations tend to produce fluctuations even in the absence of variability in consumer demand. These observations were preliminary and were mainly based on systemic dynamics rather than the nuanced operations of supply chain management. Beer distribution game, also known as a beer game, is an educational game that is used to simulate typical coordination problems of a supply chain process. The beer game was invented by J. Wright Forrester at the MIT Sloan School of Management in 1960. The beer game was a result of his work on system dynamics. It reflects a role-play simulation where several participants play with each other. The game represents a supply chain with a non-coordinated process where problems arise due to a lack of information sharing, among other factors. About the beer game, continued. The game outlines the importance of information sharing, supply chain management, and collaboration throughout the supply chain process. Due to lack of information, suppliers, manufacturers, salespeople, and customers often have an incomplete understanding of what the real demand of an order is. The most interesting part of the game is that each group has no control over another part of their supply chain. Therefore, each player has only control over its own part of the supply chain. Each player can highly influence the entire supply chain by ordering too much or too little, which can lead to a bullwhip effect. Therefore, the order decisions of one player also highly depends on the decisions of the other players in the game. In the beer game, participants enact a four-stage supply chain. The task is to produce and deliver units of beer. The factory produces and the other three stages deliver the beer units until it reaches the customer at the downstream end of the supply chain. The goal of the game is to meet customer demand with a minimal expenditure on back orders and inventory. The game is played in 20 rounds, and in each round of the game, the following four steps have to be performed. First, check deliveries. How many units of beer are being delivered to the player from the supplier? Second, check orders. How many units the customer has ordered? Third, deliver beer. Deliver as much beer as a player can to satisfy the demand. In this game, the step is performed automatically. Fourth, make order decision. Decide how many units are needed in order to maintain stock. In other words, the only thing you need to care about in this online version. Objectives of the game. The objectives of the game is to minimize total supply chain cost while meeting customer demand. Each unit of inventory costs $1 and backlog costs are $2 at each echelon. This in order to reflect the fact that stockouts are generally more costly to the business as they may lead to lost orders or even worse, lost customers. If a player cannot satisfy the demand during one or more periods, a backlog is created. Hence, there's a trade-off to make. High inventory reduces backlog cost but increases holding cost of inventory, and vice versa. Too low inventory increases the risk of stockouts and hence stockout costs. In other words, one of the key objectives of the game is to find the balance between the two, which minimizes total supply chain cost. It's also important to note that supply chains compete against one another, not as individual businesses within the same supply chain. Furthermore, in the default setting of the game, participants compete as a team, but they're not allowed to talk to one another. This in order to emulate the lack of supply chain transparency in the supply chain. Having said the aforementioned, the team with the lowest total cumulative cost wins. This is a score sheet that we normally use in the offline version of the game. Each player is keeping track of his/her inventory, backlog, shipping, orders, and supply chain cost, as shown in the illustration. With the online version of the game, though, this is all taken care of by the system, hence taking a lot of stress off the shoulder from the players and also reducing the risk of human error. Alright, now it's time for a walkthrough of our online single-play version of the beer game. Please stay tuned. Initial setup. This is the normal setup of the game in the offline version. Hence we use the same for the online one. There are 12 units of beer in the main inventories, represented by the large rectangles in the middle of each supply chain echelon. Each player also has one incoming and one outgoing inventory, both of which are initialized with 4 beer units. Each red dot on the game board is represented by 1 unit of beer. Also the incoming and outgoing orders, represented by the orange squares. In reality, these are represented by yellow post-it notes. Step 1, week 1. In the first step, we move the incoming inventory to the main inventory. Then, we move the outgoing inventory to the incoming inventory of our customer. Factory also advances the production delay. Step 2, week 1. In this step, each echelon checks the incoming quantity and deliver the same amount from the main inventory to the outgoing inventory. Step 3, week 1. In this step, we take note of the quantities in the main inventory and outgoing inventory. This is done automatically in the online version of the game. Step 4, week 1. In this step, we move the outgoing order slips to our suppliers. Factory checks production quantity and introduces the same quantity into the supply chain. Step 5, week 1. In this step, each echelon decides on order quantity by writing down the quantity number on a post-it note and places it in the outgoing order box in the upper right-hand corner of the game sheet. In the offline version of the game, the post-it note is placed upside down so that it's not visible to other supply chain echelons until it's really time to check it. This in order to emulate the lack of supply chain transparency that usually exists in real-life supply chains. Step 1, week 2. After the fifth step, the cycle is complete and we start a new iteration by repeating step 1 again. First, move the incoming inventory to the main inventory. Second, move the outgoing inventory to the incoming inventory of the customer. And third, factory also advances the production delay. And with that, we're now ready to take a look at the online version of the game. Hang on.